The morning of April 17th, 1993, dawned in the quiet town of Mill Creek, Oregon. It was a Friday, gray skies overhead, dew clinging to the grass, and a soft mist rising from the forest that bordered the town like a protective wall. Parents bustled about, buttoning jackets, packing lunches, and hurrying their children along with a mixture of excitement and nerves. That day, the kindergarten class of Mill Creek Elementary was heading out on their annual spring field trip. Destination: Pine Hollow Nature Reserve, a sprawling forest preserve less than an hour's drive away. It was supposed to be a day of laughter, learning, and discovery. 23 children, bright-eyed and full of anticipation, lined up outside the school as the old yellow bus rattled into the parking lot. For the kids, it was an adventure. For the parents, it was routine. But no one, not one single person in Mill Creek, could have guessed that by nightfall, their town would be thrown into a nightmare that would never truly end. The teacher and the journey at the head of the line stood Ms. Carol Denning, the beloved kindergarten teacher. She had taught in Mill Creek for nearly 2 decades, patient, soft-spoken, and known for her warm smile. She was the type of teacher every child adored, and every parent trusted. With her was Mr. Lewis, a young teaching assistant, barely in his 20s, new to the job but eager to help. And of course, the driver of the old bus, Frank Holloway, stoic man in his 50s who had worked for the school district for years. Together, they shepherded the children aboard, laughter echoing as small hands pressed against foggy windows. The bus pulled out of the lot at 8:45 a.m. A few parents waved from the curb, coffee mugs in hand, watching as the yellow giant disappeared. Down the road, that was the last time anyone in town ever saw the children. Arrival at Pine Hollow. According to the official trip plan, the group was supposed to arrive at Pine Hollow by 9:30 a.m. They would spend the day exploring marked trails, learning about wildlife, and eating lunch by the visitor center before returning home by 2:30 p.m. But sometime after the bus rolled past the final stretch of highway, something strange happened. They never checked in. The park rangers later confirmed that no school bus ever entered Pine Hollow that morning. Not a single visitor recalled seeing a group of children. The visitor center's logs were blank. It was as if the bus had vanished somewhere between Mill Creek and the reserve. The waiting parents at 2:30 p.m. sharp. A small crowd of parents gathered outside the school, waiting for the familiar sight of the bus to return. At first, they weren't worried. Field trips often ran late. A flat tire, a delayed lunch, a detour it wasn't unusual. But by 3 p.m., concern began to stir. By 3:30 p.m., panic was mounting. One mother, Linda Hayes, recalled later, "I remember pacing back and forth, checking the clock over and over. At first, I kept telling myself they'd pull up any second. But then 30 minutes turned into 40. Then an hour. I looked at the other parents and saw my own fear mirrored in their eyes." By 4 p.m., with still no sign of the bus, the school called the police. Within the hour, search units were dispatched. Helicopters began circling the wooded highways that cut through the hills, looking for any trace of the bus. The Road to Nowhere police traced the intended route from Mill Creek Elementary along Highway 12, cutting through a winding road known as Hunter's Pass. Before arriving at Pine Hollow, it should have been a straightforward drive, but as investigators canvassed the road, they found nothing. No skid marks, no broken railings, no signs of an accident. It was as if the bus had simply vanished into thin air. First night as the sun dipped below the horizon, Mill Creek transformed. Porch lights glowed against the dark, and families stood outside in silence, scanning the empty roads as though sheer willpower might bring their children back. Police cars moved through neighborhoods, their red and blue lights reflecting off windows inside the homes. Televisions blared with the same breaking news story. An entire kindergarten class from Mill Creek Elementary has gone missing after a school field trip this morning. Authorities say the bus has not been located. A search is underway. The anchor's voice was steady, but beneath it was the undeniable edge of horror. By midnight, the search had expanded to nearby counties. Dozens of officers scoured the roads, woods, and rivers. Volunteers joined in, carrying flashlights and calling out names into the dark. The sound of dogs barking carried through the trees. Helicopters swept across the forest, spotlights cutting through the mist. But there was no bus, no children, not even a footprint. The Whispering Woods locals began to murmur about Hunter's Pass, the winding stretch of road surrounded by thick woods where the bus would have traveled. Hunter's Pass was notorious among drivers' sharp turns, steep drops, and dense fog that clung to the road like a living thing. Stories had long circulated about strange happenings there. Headlights flickering, radios going dead, travelers claiming to see figures in the trees. Of course, most dismissed these as ghost stories. But now, with 23 children missing, people began to wonder, could the past be hiding something darker? A parent's nightmare, the Hayes family lived just 2 blocks from the school. That night, Linda sat by the phone, unable to move. On the table beside her sat her son's favorite stuffed bear, forgotten in his rush to catch the bus that morning. She would later say, "Every time the phone rang, I thought it would be news that they'd found the bus. I kept telling myself he was okay, that he was safe. Maybe the bus just broke down somewhere, but deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong." Her words echoed the fear consuming every parent in Mill Creek. By dawn, when the sun rose on April 18th, the search had become one of the largest in Oregon's history. Hundreds of volunteers joined the effort. Police combed through back roads, rivers, and abandoned cabins. Helicopters and drones scanned from above. But again, no trace. The bus was gone. The children were gone. The teacher and assistant were gone. It was as though 25 people had been erased from existence. Cliffhanger, ending, and then, late that evening, just as hope was beginning to dimmer, truck driver came forward with a strange report. Around 9:15 a.m. on the morning of April 17th, as he drove through Hunter's Pass, he swore he'd seen something. Not the bus itself, but in the mist along the tree line. He thought he saw a line of children's small figures, walking single file into the woods. When asked if there was an adult leading them, the driver hesitated. There was someone, he finally said, tall, dark, walking at the front, but I couldn't see their face. The search effort for the missing kindergarten class was already in its 2nd week, and the tension in the town of Clearwater had shifted from disbelief to dread. The woods that once served as a playground for hunters, hikers, and picnicking. Families now loomed as an endless maze, dark, impenetrable, and hiding a terrible secret. At first, volunteers poured in from nearby towns. Farmers, truck drivers, college students, all combing through the dense thickets, shoulder to shoulder with state troopers. But as days turned into weeks, the hope that the children might be found alive began to wither like the pine needles carpeting the forest floor. Yet, there were whispers, strange accounts from those who dared venture deep into the tree line. The rangers' account one evening. A park ranger named Carl Donovan stumbled back into the base camp looking pale, his face drenched in cold sweat. He had been patrolling near the old fire tower, crumbling relic from the 1950s that loomed above the treetops. While there, he swore he heard something. Voices, not adult voices, but children's laughter. At first he thought it was a trick of the wind whistling through the pines in that peculiar way that can mimic human tones. But then he heard it again, clearer this time. Giggles, the sound of sneakers crunching twigs, and the faint call of what sounded like a nursery rhyme by the time he reached the fire tower clearing. Silence. Nothing but the rustle of branches. Donovan refused to return to that spot alone after sunset. Word spread quickly among the volunteers. Some brushed it off as exhaustion and nerves. Others weren't so sure. The bus driver's burden, meanwhile, the bus driver, Edgar Wilkes, became the target of whispers of his own. For days, reporters had camped outside his small bungalow on the edge of town. How could a driver just lose a bus full of children, they asked. How do you explain leaving point A without ever reaching point B? Wilkes insisted he remembered every detail, clearly loading the children, hearing their chatter, even driving the winding gravel roads toward Clearwater Pines Park. And then, a blank. It's like someone cut the film reel in my head, he told investigators, clutching his cap with shaking hands. 1 second, I'm driving. The next, I'm parked in my driveway with no memory of getting there. Doctors diagnosed him with dissociative amnesia, likely from trauma. But the families of the missing children weren't convinced. To them, Edgar Wilkes was a coward, or worse, a liar. The forest that watches Clearwater locals had always told stories about the forest. Some called it the pines that watch. Hunters claimed they often felt eyes on their backs. Campers said they heard scratching sounds around their tents at night. And old-timers muttered about a family that had vanished there in 1957, a case never solved. But now, with an entire kindergarten class swallowed whole by those trees, the tales no longer seemed like just folklore. Dogs brought in from neighboring states reacted strangely inside the forest. They whined, tugged at their leashes, refused to go deeper into certain areas, even with food rewards. At one point, a trained bloodhound broke free and bolted out of the woods, refusing to go back no matter how hard his handler tried. Something in those trees unsettled even the animals. A break in the case. On the 17th day of the search, a logging crew clearing underbrush several miles north of the park stumbled upon something. At first, they thought it was just debris scraps of fabric tangled in the branches. But when they looked closer, their blood ran cold. It was a child's backpack, bright yellow, with stickers peeling off the sides. Inside, a few crayons, a small stuffed bear, and a juice box that had long since leaked dry. The name stitched on the tag read, Allison B. Allison Bennett, one of the missing kindergartners. The find reignited the investigation. Search crews swarmed the area, combing every inch of soil, every tree hollow, every shallow creek bed. But no other trace of the children was found, just one backpack, as if it had been deliberately placed there, like a breadcrumb on a trail that led nowhere. The town splits apart. Clearwater, once a quiet community where everyone knew everyone else, was now tearing at the seams. Some believed the children had been abducted, perhaps trafficked, by someone who knew the park well. Others whispered darker theories, cults, sacrifices. Supernatural forces tied to the land. Parents who once shared coffee at the same diner now avoided each other, their grief manifesting as suspicion. I saw your brother near the trailhead the day they went missing. You're only saying that because you want the police off your back. Accusations flew. Friendships shattered. The disappearance of 21 children was no longer just a mystery. It had become a curse, consuming the entire town. A lead buried in silence, and then came the most unsettling clue of all. A local hunter, dragging his deer stand deeper into the forest one evening, stumbled across an old shack, weather-beaten, half-collapsed, hidden behind a curtain of moss and vines. On the wall inside were dozens of handprints, small, smeared in something dark. He swore they were children's hands. By the time authorities arrived, the shack was gone completely. The hunter led them back to the same spot, swore up and down it had been there just hours before. But now, nothing. Only forest floor. The official report dismissed it as a hoax or a hallucination. But in Clearwater, it became one more whispered story that parents told in hushed tones when the sun went down. The seventh week, as the seventh week approached, the search was scaled back. The state could no longer justify the manpower and undressed flyers with the children's faces smiling, gap-toothed, filled with innocence faded on telephone poles. Families kept vigil, but the crowds had thinned. Clearwater returned to its uneasy quiet until one morning, when a county worker clearing a drainage ditch at the far edge of the forest unearthed something that froze him in place. A discovery so chilling, so unexplainable, that the entire investigation shifted overnight, and it would bring the case into territory darker than anyone in Clearwater had ever imagined. The news had already faded from the front pages. 7 weeks had passed since the 23 kindergartners, their teacher, and 2 parent volunteers never returned from their Springfield trip. At first, the case consumed the nation, flashing across every TV screen, flooding radio broadcasts, splashed across every newspaper headline in bold, black letters. Entire class vanishes. But after days became weeks, and weeks turned into over a month with no clear answers, the coverage began to die down. The missing children were spoken of in hushed voices, and only their families remained relentless, clinging to fading hope. It was in the 7th week, when the woods were at their most silent, that something unexpected happened. A maintenance worker from a logging company was sent into a stretch of forest that bordered the last known path of the missing school bus. His job was simple: surveyed the trees that were marked for cutting, but as he trudged through the undergrowth, his eyes caught something out of place. At first, he thought it was litter, a scrap of faded yellow in the dirt. But when he knelt down, he realized it wasn't trash. It was fabric, a strip of cloth, stained by rain and mud, patterned with bright cartoon dinosaurs. He froze. He had seen that very same pattern before, on the missing posters plastered across every convenience store, gas station, and post office wall. One of the children had been wearing a dinosaur print jacket the day they vanished, and just a few feet away, partly hidden under a blanket of pine needles, he spotted something else. A shoe, tiny, mud-caked, Velcro straps. His heart pounded. He called for backup. Within hours, the forest filled with law enforcement, search dogs, and forensic teams. The discovery, the deeper they moved into the trees, the more they found. At first, it was small, almost insignificant things. A water bottle, a child's crumpled drawing, the edge of a backpack zipper. But then, less than a mile from the logging trail, searchers stumbled upon a clearing, and there, sitting at an unnatural angle, was the school bus. It was tilted sideways, one tire half buried in the mud, windows cracked, streaked with rain and dirt. Branches and ivy had grown across its frame, as if the forest had tried to swallow it whole. But the strangest thing, the bus wasn't crashed, it wasn't wrecked. It looked as if someone had simply driven it into the woods and left it there. Investigators stepped inside cautiously, their flashlights sweeping across the interior. What they found made the air turn colder. The seats were empty, no children, no teacher, no volunteers, but their belongings remained. Lunchboxes, still packed with sandwiches gone stale. Tiny coats slung across the seat backs. A row of stuffed animals sitting neatly on the last bench, waiting for owners who would never return. There was no sign of struggle, no broken glass, no overturned seats. It was as if the entire class had quietly stood up, filed out of the bus, and walked into the woods together. But why? And where had they gone? The trail forensic teams searched tirelessly. Dogs picked up faint trails, leading deeper into the thickest parts of the forest. Trails that twisted and split, as if the children had scattered or been led deliberately. 7 weeks of weather had erased much of the evidence, but one thing was clear: the children hadn't simply vanished into thin air. Something or someone had taken them further into the woods. And then came the chilling detail. Near the far edge of the clearing, beneath a mound of earth, investigators uncovered something buried. Not bodies, not yet, but toys. Dozens of them laid carefully in the dirt. A plastic fire truck, a Barbie doll with matted hair, crayons broken in half, arranged almost in a circle. It wasn't random, it looked deliberate, like a ritual, and that discovery forced investigators to consider a horrifying possibility. Whoever had taken the children might not have been a stranger. Whoever it was, the kids trusted them enough to leave the bus willingly. The theories as news of the bus discovery spread, theories exploded once again. Some believed the group had wandered off, lost, and succumbed to the wilderness. But others pointed to the bus itself. It was too far from the road, too deep into the trees. A child could not have driven it there. Another theory suggested that someone had lured them off the bus, perhaps posing as park staff or emergency responders. But if that were true, why had the belongings been left behind? Why take the children and not their things? And then a darker theory emerged. The toys buried in the earth weren't a mistake. They weren't an accident. They were part of something far more sinister. Was this the work of a cult? A group hiding deep in the wilderness, preying on the vulnerable? Or was it something else entirely, something older, tied to the legends of the forest itself? The final clues as investigators followed the trails deeper. They found fragments that only deepened the mystery. A torn piece of the teacher's notebook, her handwriting still visible. Stay calm, stay together. A whistle, broken in half, and near a stream, they uncovered something that froze every officer in place. A line of HANT-PRINTS. Tiny, muddy handprints, pressed along the rocks, dozens of them leading further into the shadows. But then, just as suddenly as the trail began, it ended. No footprints, no remains, nothing but silence. The children had been swallowed by the forest. The aftermath, the official investigation, never gave the families the closure they so desperately needed. To this day, no bodies have been recovered, no arrests made, no definitive answers. The school bus was eventually towed out of the woods and placed into evidence. It sits in storage to this day, a haunting monument to unanswered questions. For the parents, life became a cruel routine of waiting. Every knock at the door, every unknown phone call, every breaking news headline. For years, they thought it might be the moment their children were finally found. But the years turned into decades, and the silence never broke. The legend and, yet locals, still whisper. Hikers claim they've seen shadows in the trees, fleeting, darting between trunks. The sound of children laughing carried on the wind. Some say they've stumbled across small piles of toys in the dirt, arranged neatly, as if waiting to be discovered. Others swear that on quiet nights, if you walk far enough into those woods, you can hear it. The faint squeak of a school bus door opening, and the sound of little voices singing softly just beyond the trees. The 23 children of Pine Valley, their teacher, the volunteers, they left one spring morning on what should have been a day of joy. They never came home. 7 weeks later, the forest revealed a bus, but not the truth. And maybe it never will. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, not because the answers don't exist, but because the answers are too terrifying to face.